I'm now joined by Leon Koch, former Director of Communications at the European Azerbaijan Society and founder of Atticus Partners, who is in Ankara right now, and Orhan Amashov here with me in the studio. Firstly, Orhan, I just want to speak to you about the recent peace agreement. I think they've just published the details. Yep. What are the key findings from it?
Yep, so the peace agreement was published effectively an hour ago. It was initialed on the 8th of August, and we know the text of the peace treaty was agreed upon on the 13th of March 2025. It's absolutely interesting. 17 provisions are entailed at its textual core. Fundamentally, basically, a lot to say, a lot to absorb, but allow me to be very, very brief. Fundamentally, 1991 borders, in principle, they have been confirmed. Article 1 says in the crystal clear way that having confirmed the boundaries between the Soviet Socialist Republic of the former USSR became the international borders of respective independent states and have been recognized as such by the international community. That effectively means that the border delimitation and demarcation between these two countries, which is a long process, will take some considerable time, and that does not need to end in order for these two countries to finally sign and ratify the peace treaty. It will take some time, and that will be in line with Article 1. This is a very important point, in line with 1991 Almaty Declaration, UN Charter. Of course, the maps will be used. The maps may emanate from early 1975 and earlier dates, but fundamental framework contingent upon Almaty Declaration has been confirmed here. A couple of very important points. I think Article 12 is incredibly interesting, because as you know, Azerbaijan has a reservation regarding the Armenian constitution. That will need to be addressed. That's a prerequisite, and we know that once that obstacle is removed, parties, after initialing the peace treaty, which they did on the 8th of August, will sign and ratify it. And Article 12 is very interesting to that effect. We say that the parties in their bilateral relations shall be guided by international law, and no party may invoke the provisions of its internal legislation as justification for its failure to perform the present agreement. That effectively means that Armenia, on the basis of what its internal legislation may entail, cannot possibly actually do something in the direction of militating against principles entailed within this peace treaty. And I think that Article 7 and 15 are incredibly important. They were agreed at a later stage. One of them is about no third-party presence along the conditional border. That's Article 7. And also, of course, Article 15, which is a long and complex article. And according to that article, the parties will need to withdraw all of their claims against each other. And also, they shouldn't be part of any third-party claim that could be initiated by any other actor on the global stage. These are very important. They provide legal certainty to be going on with.
Right. Wow, that's really good. I'm now going to turn to Leon. Leon, my first thing, history was made last week when Azerbaijan and Armenia made the peace deal in Washington. How significant was that?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think Orhan has laid out the parameters of what the agreement is or should be, but I guess my question would be, is this the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? A lot of things still need to happen in the runway now between, I would say, the parliamentary elections in Yerevan in June of next year. Pashinyan, who many think was lucky to keep his job, has now got a very short runway to make this stick with the hardliners, with the diaspora, with elements of the opposition. And so the articles which have just been articulated by Orhan about how this cannot or should not be unwound, at the end of the day, it does still require two sides to ratify this agreement and progress it. This is a preliminary signing of a peace agreement, but it is very, very historic because the Minsk group, the OSCE, with both sides now calling for its disbanding, couldn't solve this problem in 30 years. Azerbaijan and Armenia have negotiated on this text and this agreement in 2 years and have managed to do it on their own without also the introduction and help and assistance of the European Union, who offered it, I might add. And therefore, there is absolutely hope for a long-standing peace agreement. I think there is economic benefit for both sides regionally. And you might ask me next why the United States is getting itself involved in this. One, because I think Donald Trump understands that if he comes in at the last minute, he can wrap a ribbon around it and say that he has put this deal together. But at the end of the day, the United States has a commercial interest, and the preliminary agreement signed between Exxon and Sokar a number of months ago is evidence of that. They understand that there is an opportunity here, and the body language between President Aliyev and President Trump in Washington spoke volumes.
Definitely. Thank you for drawing upon that point. And my next question actually was going to be about the surrounding region. So there's been a lot of nations congratulating President Aliyev, and the King of Jordan actually said that, what does this mean for, future relations? And I was going to ask you that particular question on an international front and a local front regionally. What significance will that have on, nations?
Absolutely massive. I think that other countries in the Caucasus or to its immediate north might start be thinking about where they want to orbit themselves, because Azerbaijan and Armenia in the last number of years, Armenia by virtue of its loss of the territory which it saw as is, but the CSTO treaty wasn't enacted by Russia. They didn't come to their aid, so why should they bother to continue with that? They even had the base in Gyumri. That wasn't helpful in any event. The downing of the commercial plane in December, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back vis-a-vis Azerbaijan and its relationship with Russia. It had already managed to disband peacekeepers in June of last year, and it is now absolutely looking both east and west. But the literal agreement of the Caspian Sea, I might add, is another element to this, because in 2018 this was effectively sorted, which means that a Trans-Caspian pipeline between Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan becomes a real thing now that it has sorted this problem or is in the process of sorting this. And then the European Union and other international actors have access to the fourth largest gas reserves in the world. So this is a monumental first step, which could absolutely raise the fortunes of both the Azerbaijani population, the Armenian population, and the wider region. The last point I would just make is that if you go onto social media, and Russian political talk shows are absolutely cock-a-hoop in their disbelief at how this has happened, why Armenia has walked away from its big brother, and yet they have done nothing to help them through this entire period. Therefore, a genuine rapprochement, a long-lasting one between Azerbaijan and Armenia is absolutely on the cards here.
Then I would like to specifically ask about the connectivity agenda, about this Trump route for international peace and also sustainability or prosperity. So TRIP. So Iran is incredibly concerned about it, but their position has been slightly altered. Initially, we heard from their advisor to the Supreme Leader. He criticized it. He said that we do our level best to make sure that project is not put into practice. But then President Pezeshkian said something quite different. My question to you, what do you make of that connectivity model? Azerbaijan gets probably what it wants, unobstructed access to Nakhchivan exclave. Do you think that Prime Minister Pashinyan will be able to convince the local population, in particular before this parliamentary election, that this is the best possible deal for Armenia, and actually the sovereignty is intact as well?
Where else is it going to turn? I think that it understands that certainly within the course of the next 3 years, the occupant of the White House is an incredibly transactional person, and therefore Armenia's best interests are being served to be helpful to him, and which will enable him to say that he is doing his work well in terms of a peace president on the international stage. Iran can say whatever it wants, but it has no agency in this fight. They probably are worried about secessionist elements within their own domestic population, given the large number of them that are ethnic Azerbaijani. At the end of the day, though, this corridor, which will not be guaranteed or guaranteed by the United States, but will be operated by probably US commercial elements. I understand 3 parties have already put themselves forward for it. This is exactly the same model as what the minerals deal is or was supposed to be in Ukraine, or why the Democratic Republic of the Congo have made overtures towards the United States. By virtue of their economic success comes long-term prosperity. And Armenia, if it is an enabler of that, will also be seen in those terms. And I think that is probably part of the calculus of Pashinyan, and that will be part of the lobbying and media comms strategy and efforts towards the domestic population in the course of the next year, effectively. I mean, I would make one additional argument is whatever UNCA, the diaspora lobbying group in the United States, thinks is a good idea, which is usually not the case, then I think he can say that I'm looking after the interests of Armenians that are in the country, not those that are in Burbank, California.
Now that's the real Armenian philosophy of Prime Minister Pashinyan, which effectively is concentrate on the local population.
And Leon, just before you go, very quickly, would you say that this is a success story for all parties involved?
Well, it's definitely a success story for Azerbaijan. I mean, they've won the war and they're winning the peace. They've come out of this with, if you think about Azerbaijan's trajectory over the last 15 years, 20 years, it got what it wanted out of the European Union in terms of the Southern Gas Corridor. It has stability again in the region. It has regained its territorial integrity. It is now going through the process of a rapprochement with its immediate neighbor. This is also an enabler to a longer-term prospect of something happening between Armenia and Turkey. So you can see the domino effect as a result of this deal, this signing. If this can be made to stick over the course of the next year, then this is a monumental effort on all sides. But I think both Azerbaijan and Armenia and those involved in the negotiation of this process and this document should absolutely be congratulated.
Thank you, Leon Cook, for joining us this evening. Thank you.